a lot of actors don't love watching themselves on screen. Many have told me. Even Daniel Day-Lewis found it excruciating. And you guys, for the first time, are going back and watching these episodes and then talking about them on your show. Can you give me a sense of what does that feel like to replay such an important part of your personal histories as actors? And what's the biggest surprise as you re-explore these episodes one by one?
First of all, the shock at how long ago and how much aging has happened to all of us.
Well, not me. I look the same.
Except for
you age.
But I don't particularly like watching myself for a number of reasons, because acting, you see things you should have done or you could have done better, or things you don't like about your performance, and that's hard sometimes. But with this, it's a bit hard because, a lot of the people, both in front of and behind the camera, have passed away. Most notably Jim Gandolfini. So, there's a bittersweet quality to it, but I'm proud of all the work we've done to get together as a group, and it's in a lot of ways pleasing to watch that work again. So it's bittersweet.
Yeah. I can't stand to watch myself, and especially back then, which was 20, I come on in 1999. It was 21 years ago. I know and even now, I don't watch myself. I always know I could have done something better. Why is my hand like that? Why am I doing that? I very rarely watch myself unless I absolutely have to. And back then, I think, and I hope 20 years later, I became a better actor now. I see a lot of stuff. I was kind of green then. I got better as the series went on, but the last thing I want to do is have a Steve Schirripa film festival,
But you've gotten to be a better actor, but the material that you guys acted, I don't know that it gets any better than that for many actors at all. And so from that standpoint, can you disconnect with your personal discomfort and just enjoy those lines of dialogue and the tension and plotting like a fine wine?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially with, the distance of time, being able to be a little bit more objective because it's so long ago. But yeah, I do enjoy it. And the material holds up, I learned over time is you're really only as good as your material as an actor. And no matter, I don't care how good you are as an actor, when your material bad, your performance just is not going to be that good. It just isn't. Absolutely.
The writing is brilliant, and I remember when we were doing the show back then. I don't know if I had email, didn't have email, but I would get him FedEx to the house, to my apartment, and I couldn't wait to get the script and open it up and read it. Honestly, I mean, it was that good. Like a fan, it was just, and I'm going as I'm reading it. This is unbelievable. This is great stuff. And that was every single script. I looked forward. Matter of fact, in my garage, I kept almost all of them. I have a ton of them in my house in California, and I just remember getting it, reading it immediately. That's how good the material was. Brilliant, really.
Well, I listened to your first podcast, and, hearing your voices to an old timer like me who watched those episodes every Sunday from Jump Street here, it's almost like sitting in front of the pork store. Although, the only thing that's kind of missing is that guy with the silver wings going, "Oh!" But
Walnuts, we have a wingo meter, Mike. We're going to be gauging Paulie Walnut's wings. In the pilot, they were smaller, and as the series goes on, now and again, we will be gauging how big those wings get.
Yes. Well,
Eventually
this
it was more wing than not.
Oh, wait, say that again, Michael.
Eventually, it was more wings than not.
Well, I'm processing this podcast one way, but my youngest daughter, she's now ripping through the series and she's loving it. And a lot of young people do that. Why would you say that this show is so catching on with younger people?
Well, it's a very good question, not an easy one, because I've noticed that happening in the last year and a half, 2 years. A whole other generation has caught on to this show. And when we, released to the press that we were doing this, David Chase called me and expressed his happiness that we were doing a podcast, and expressed his desire to support us in this. And I brought that up about the young people, and he said, "Why is that?" Just like you are. And I said, and I've said this before, and I don't mean to be flippant about it, but it's just really, really, really good. On a level that not many shows are, to be honest. And I guess they get it. And it's very, very pleasing to see, because, the show hit, the people of our generation loved it. That's one thing. They have nostalgia for it over the years. They talk about it. We've done appearances, they come. But to have a whole other generation that's not their time, they don't have nostalgia about watching it for the first time when it came out, that you can't predict. So I'm very flattered by that.
I also think it's much easier now. It's more accessible. I mean, back then, 11 million people had HBO. Not a lot of people at all. I think now with Amazon and HBO Go and HBO On Demand, it's easier accessible. I think their parents watched it. Back then, they were 10 and 12 years old, and or whatever age, and they weren't allowed to watch it, yet they saw the enjoyment their parents were getting, and I think they want to, it's something that they could bond over. And there is a whole bunch of college kids out there. I think once they're out of the house and off to college, they're watching The Sopranos now.
Well, now, Steve, you're in our living rooms every Friday night with Blue Bloods. When people come up to you now, what do they hit you up on? Is it The Sopranos or is it Blue Bloods, would you say?
Well, it always was, where's Junior? Where's Junior? Hey, Bobby, where's Junior? But I joined Blue Bloods in 2015. Another great show. I mean, most actors are lucky to get one, and I was lucky enough to get two. Now it's Anthony. Anthony, where's Aaron? You guys are great. Anthony. So it's either Anthony or Bobby. Very rarely, if someone calls me Steve, I think I know them. So it's very rare. But he's a great character. And the writing on Blue Bloods, primetime show, I didn't really watch it before I was on it. I've done over 75 episodes now, way more than The Sopranos. I've only did 53 Sopranos. And it's been a great ride, and we're still going strong. The ratings are great, and a great set of writers there also. And when you get the material there, I read it and I go, this is great stuff. Listen, we've all as actors did stuff that's not fantastic. Let's not kid ourselves. Not everything was a gem, especially starting out. And to have good material, it makes it much easier as an actor. Am I right, Michael? I mean, when you're trying to, when you're reading something, you're going, how the hell am I going to make this sound real? I mean, this is terrible. You have to try to find a way, but I'm very happy to be part of both of them. So they could call me Anthony. They don't, a lot of actors, it bothers them. They call you by your character name. It doesn't bother me at all. I'll be Bobby forever, Anthony forever. I'm okay with that.
Well, Michael, trying to imagine anyone but Jim Gandolfini as Tony Soprano is like imagining someone other than Brando as Don Corleone to me. But back then there were auditions. There was Michael Rispoli, who would go on to play Jackie Aprile, and then there was Steven Van Zandt. And when I did that piece on Deadline, that long look back, he said that he went to the auditions. He walked past Jim Gandolfini, closed the door, and said to the people, "Why am I here? I just saw this guy in True Romance. That is that's Tony Soprano. Michael, can you give us a sense as to, a lot of this is luck and chance and timing, but just give a sense as to that whole notion of landing that Tony role, which was just so crucial for a show like this. He was really the fulcrum.
Yeah, I mean, very important. I think that Rispoli's one of my favorite actors. He's really great. And I knew Michael. I'd worked with Michael before The Sopranos. So I was there at the final auditions in the waiting room. And I was, I didn't know Gandolfini. I knew his work a little bit, not much. And I was like, oh, Michael's a great choice. He's a great actor. And I did see this other guy in the room who I kind of recognized, but I wasn't sure who it was. And the casting director, Sheila Jaffe, took me aside and said, that's little Steven Van Zandt. And I was kind of blown away because I knew his music, and he had the Silvio hair on. So he looked very different. But, listen, obviously I can't think of anyone else doing it really in hindsight than Jim. And besides him just being tremendously talented actor, he also brought a physicality that in the end was very important, I think, for Tony Soprano. Just first of all, he's very big, and he even seemed bigger than he actually was in a way. He just somehow the way he acted and performed made him even seem more imposing, and that I think that really worked for him and for the character as well. David talked about, how much he liked Steven's auditioning and the idea of him. It would have been a much more kind of comedic. That's what David said, at least, that, in tone to go that route, because that's just something that Stevie brings to the character, which really worked for Silvio as well. He's a lot of fun, that character. And David liked him so much that they wrote in the character, Silvio Dante, for Steven.
I honestly I couldn't see now, when I'm looking again, and we haven't watched the show in 20 years, but now when you're looking back, I don't see anyone except for the people that played the roles. I can't imagine anyone else doing it. I can't imagine whether it be Tony Soprano or Christopher or Uncle Junior, who I know numerous actors read for that. Tony Sirico read for that. Frank Vincent read for that. Joe Vitarelli from Analyze This, he told me he read for Uncle Junior. So all these people you saw, I don't see anyone but the people who wind up with the roles and did the roles. That's me. I don't see anyone else doing it.
And that's a credit to the casting people, but also to David to kind of see, some other actors might have been a little bit more on the nose for certain characters, but he wanted people who were much more distinctive and not like, Dominic. That's a great example. You could have gone for a more wise guy, tough type thing, but Dominic's character, I mean, I can't imagine anybody doing that role. But Dominic, so distinctive.
Well, David did say that when Jim first came for his audition, I think he was late. He was running. He started his audition and he basically stopped it. And he goes, you know what? I can't do this right now. I'm not good. I'm not good. And then he goes out the door, and David was like, I could tell that I wanted him, but I had no idea if he was going to return. And it became this whole thing. And I think the thing about Gandolfini is that, he could be so charming, and then sometimes he could be so intense, and he was so convincing. And that, there's certain actors who can summon that kind of, I don't know, I guess combustibility, I would call it. And, I don't know. I just think that was just one of those things. To me, it was like William Shatner as Captain Kirk, for instance. There are certain times when the right guy gets the right role, and yowza.
Absolutely. I mean, Jim had so many layers to him. He could be, as Tony Soprano, I mean, he could be lovable. He could be, as we see in episode 1, episode 5, which we just watched, College. I mean, as he kills the snitch, I mean, brutally chokes him, with the wire. And you see that, and then you see him in another scene with his daughter. Couldn't be prouder and happier. He's sitting across the table as they visit colleges. So there's a contrast there, if there ever was one, and that's what made him a great actor,
That episode you just cited seemed to be really the one that established this show in its first season. Michael, you were there. Why was that so important?
Well, it was a kind of a standalone episode. There's in most Soprano episodes, there's three stories: A, B, and C. A being usually the biggest, and then descending in order. But there's only two storylines in that episode. It's more of almost like a little movie. It's a very self-contained. You don't necessarily need to have watched what comes on before, what comes on after to keep the narrative flow. The other thing is, HBO read the script before we shot it and was very concerned with the audience giving up on Tony Soprano, getting turned off by this leading man they've kind of grown to love in the first 4 episodes, now killing someone in cold blood. And David said, no, we're going to lose the audience if he doesn't kill this guy, because it's part of the mafia code that Tony adheres to. This guy's a rat. He was a drug dealer who ratted out people and ruined people's lives, and he needs to have retribution, put upon him by Tony Soprano. And they got behind David. They didn't fight him any further. And luckily we got the episode we do.
Yes.
I think, we talked about it, Michael and myself. I think it's probably the first time a lead of a series murdered someone. I don't mean as a cop show, but he flat out murdered someone in cold blood. Yeah. And I don't remember, any other series. I don't think Gilligan ever killed anybody.
In very brutal fashion, too. Very, very brutally. Very intense.
So that was pretty amazing. And this is the start of the anti-hero and how the audience loved him and rooted for him. That was the beginning of it, right there.
I remember the series The Shield, and Michael Chiklis basically did the same thing. And I feel like The Sopranos made that okay.
Without a doubt.
Yes.
Without a doubt. Open the door
now,
for that type of behavior.
And I think it also was the first time. When Vincent Pastore's character, Big Pussy, when they killed off a main character of the show. That might have been the first time that, they didn't kill off any of the friends, the Friends cast, that was the first time a main character gone,
Yeah, and a beloved character. Yeah, it was a very risky and gutsy move.
Well, now a moment on those death scenes. We never saw so many regulars killed in a series so abruptly. What was it like when you got an episode script? If you were going, did David Chase tell you, or did you quickly thumb to the end to see if your character still had lines?
Me personally, usually the word got out, but I would go to the front, see if I was in it, go to the back, see if they killed me. When I finally, my character got killed off the next to last episode, David came to my apartment to tell me. A lot of times guys were told before the read-through, or he would call them on the phone, call them off to the side. For whatever reason, he was in the neighborhood. He came up to my apartment. It was like a real hit. He knocked on the door. He said, I guess you know why I'm here. So, David came and, we talked, and it was very nice of him. I was kind of flattered, and that's how I found out. I don't know, Michael, you had known for a while, right?
I knew for a long time, but it was, I knew it was coming. It was coming close to the end of the series, so a lot of people were going to be dead. And I never really, I'll be honest with you, I never worried about getting killed off the show.
Well, because you were the one of the main characters, but
maybe it was because of that.
They weren't going to do the show without you, without Edie, without Jim. But
yeah, you had to have someone.
Everybody else could go.
I didn't really feel that threatened by that.
Listen, I didn't buy an apartment until after the show ended. I was afraid they were going to kill me. I was going to head back to Vegas.
Of course.
That
Well,
was
now,
a real concern.
so this story and what you guys are doing with your podcast, it's all about great storytelling, about a great series. So I'm going to ask each of you for a reminiscence that we can quickly go through. Now, Steve, your fight with Tony.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because it looked like you guys were going at it pretty hard.
Well, first of all, we were supposed to shoot that in the summer. We were upstate. It was myself, Edie Falco, Aida Totoro, and Jim, just the four of us. And we were up there basically for 2 weeks filming this. And when it came time to do the fight, Jim had braces on at least one of his knees, if not both. He had gotten operated in the off season. And he said, you know what, I can't do this the right way. And that was in July. So fast forward to January, 6 months later, and they rebuild that cabin on the set at Silver Cup Studios. And we do the fight scene over a day and a half. And Jim says to me, listen, we're good friends. Let's try to make this as real as possible. Let's go as far as we possibly can. And you can only really do that with someone you know well. I mean, a stranger, not too many people are going to be game for that. And that's what we did. I pulled his hair and he choked me. I had a cut. And Jim is much, even though I'm taller than him, he's much stronger than me. It was in better shape than me. He choked me. I pulled his hair. Almost the entire thing until the end, when he falls into the table, are the two of us, not a stuntman. And I remember at one point I headbutted him and he went down. And I went, oh boy, if he gets up, he's going to kick my ass for real. And it was a day and a half. I was sore as hell. I thought it came out. I was very happy when I saw it, one of the few things. And that's how that happened, and it was very real. He's a big, strong guy with big, strong hands.
Well, now, and Michael, for you, and I'm not going to spoil who the dismembered mobster is that we're talking about, but there was a scene involving you and Jim, Tony Soprano, your character, Christopher, having to basically throw a dismembered body off a cliff. And there was, as I recall you telling me, a bottle of wild turkey. Can you explain?
Well, we rehearsed the scene out in a state park. So we're supposed to toss this body off a cliff into the river, which is way down the bottom of the ravine or something. And we rehearsed it before dark, and then they had to wait for the sun to set, and they were going to light the whole forest and whatever. So it's quite a long setup. So we had to go back to the trailers and wait. And we were getting a little bored, and Jim cracked open a bottle of wild turkey, and we got to talking and hanging out, and 2 hours, 3 hours go by. Finally, they knock on the door. It's time to shoot. And the bottle was empty, put it that way. And we stumbled out to the edge of the cliff, and the crew got very nervous that there may not be a season 4 if we shoot this scene. So they chained us by the ankles to trees so we could get close enough to the edge of the cliff without falling off. And they covered the chains with leaves so the camera couldn't see them. And we got the job done.
It's amazing because I wouldn't have noticed that, but when I watch the series, which I'm sure I will again, I'm going to be on the lookout for that. And one last question.
Well, it was a Friday night, Mike, so
And Mike, what we're doing, we've been working on this podcast for 6 months.
Yes.
And what it is, basically, is it's two friends, Michael and myself, we've known each other, obviously, a long time. We've done a lot of projects together. And it's two friends having lunch, dinner, across the table from each other, reminiscing about the series. And that's what it is. It's very loose. We tell behind-the-scenes stories. I have a lot of questions. Michael was a writer. Michael, much more privy to stuff than I was. He was there from day one. And that's what it is. We were reluctant to do this because of what's going on in the world. We said, who the hell needs to talk about a TV show now? But so many people had contacted both myself and Michael about doing it. We said, well, let's, let's try it. And you know, we're 5 or 6 episodes in now. People seem to have enjoyed it. The comments are good, and that's what it is. Two friends talking. It makes us from going stir crazy. I'm in New York City. He's in California.
I think it's wonderful. But let me ask you one other question that I don't have the answer to. You know, Michael, your character, Christopher, was always trying to tell his story, you know, developing scripts, being around movie directors like Favreau and all that kind of stuff. And the volume of movie reference touchstones in Sopranos is vast, and it's always really fun. Now, The Sopranos is my all-time favorite series, and if I had to choose my favorite films, it would be the first two Godfathers and Goodfellas. And I don't really have an answer to this, but you know, these criminals, they're really kind of violent parasites, basically. Why do you think we so love movies and TV shows devoted to this criminal element?
Oh, to my opinion was there's 2 reasons. When you talk about The Godfather, Goodfellas, and The Sopranos, you can't really separate Francis Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and David Chase. So not only do you have this great subject matter material, you have 3 of the great artists of the medium executing them. So, because believe me, there's a ton of mob movies that you wouldn't say that about, that you wouldn't be enamored, that you wouldn't watch again, that are just garbage. But you have geniuses of the medium handling the material. Why is the material so attractive? I think they're very colorful characters that bridge, you know, kind of old world loyalties and family bonds and bonds of brotherhood with, you know, outlaw behavior. And somehow that is, and, you know, and through this Italian American lens with food and fat and humor. And that makes for a seductive combination. But, you know, in terms of those projects that you mentioned, you can't separate the great and then the great actors like Gandolfini, Pacino, De Niro, Brando. You can't, you know, I'll show you 5 gangster movies, mafia movies that you never want to ever see, that you won't even get through. So it's not a slam dunk just because you're in the medium.
Oh, but it's kind of like the modern day Western, you know, where, you know, why were they years ago attracted to Westerns, which aren't as popular as they once were, with these outlaws drinking and killing people in the street? I do think The Godfather, you saw the gangsters in a different setting. You saw them at home with their families. And I think that's very true about The Sopranos. You don't just see them in the club and everything's glamorous. You see Tony Soprano having problems with his mother and his wife and his kids and guys at work, very much like we all do. So, you know, I think it's just a genre that it will. And listen, they've had gangster movies since the 20s, since the beginning of time. You know.
Yes, yes.